Hi, welcome back to the Hornthrowers podcast. We are joined again by Ross from Dawntreader and Viatorum, here to talk about your brand new full length, first debut full length. Um, yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys.
No, like the feeling's mutual, and it was nice to actually meet you in person at Fortress this year.
Yeah, I figured we'd get onto that pretty quick. It was lovely to meet you as well. It was a shame I couldn't meet Liv too, but yeah, it was really nice to meet you in person. And we had some good chats. It was a good time.
Yeah, I mean you're going next year, so
Yeah, I got my tickets as soon as I saw that Agalock were announced. So,
A lot of people did the same thing, to be fair.
yeah,
but then I was really disappointed with the rest of the lineup. There's only like two or three bands I'm interested in.
I mean it's not
Yeah,
complete yet.
compared to this year, it's already a little lackluster. But maybe 2024 was just insanely good, and it will never reach that peak again. I don't know.
I think that was kind of the issue for me that there was no point in the day where it's like because there's no clashes, but that also means there's no window when nothing's happening where you can just go get food or something.
Yeah,
And it's
you're always
just
going to miss
very
something.
nice.
Oh yeah, so obviously it's like your first full length. We were wondering like what your plan was when you set out to make the full length. Like what were your objectives and the intentions with this album?
There wasn't really that much of a plan. I could retroactively pretend that there was intent behind everything that I was doing, but that wouldn't be true. I knew that I wanted to kind of challenge myself to make the first full length, make it like a cohesive piece of music where it flowed quite well. But other than that, I didn't really have an end goal besides just writing the best, most original sort of newest material that I could that felt fresh to me as well. It was always kind of designed as more of a challenge to myself to see if I could pull it off, essentially. And it turns out I did a pretty good job. People seem to be enjoying it, which has been really nice and really encouraging. It's not the response that I expected. It's been a really kind of surreal and slightly crazy couple of weeks.
Yeah, like I saw
Um,
like Bloom and Decay was on like the top 10 new releases on Bandcamp or something like that. Like and
it
that's like
spent a couple of
insane.
days at number 5 in Bandcamp for metal, which is it never even crossed my mind that that was a possibility that it might do that well.
Yeah.
Like that was just not something that I'd considered even for a minute. So the fact that it's done that well is hugely like gratifying and still slightly shocking. I'm not really, I haven't really processed it yet. I don't think quite how many people have been listening to it. But it's been great. Like I say, it's not that I had a particular end goal in mind. I just wanted to see if I could do something that still sounded like Dawntreader, but was a little more cohesive, a little more fluid. Kind of used a lot of the things that a lot of the kind of themes and kind of trappings that I'd felt fallen back on a few times, but I wanted to expand those and make the whole thing kind of bigger and grander and a little more like all encompassing, I guess, and kind of showing off every bit of what Dawntreader sounds like in my head, if that makes sense.
No,
Um,
and it's something I think you achieved. Like I've loved like sort of like the previous tracks that you put out, but like I really felt like with the new album that it was a bit more like cohesive and like planned. Whereas like I think with like Black Gaze and things like that, there is the tendency to just kind of like meander and kind of get lost in the vibe kind of a little bit. But with this one, it definitely felt like a lot of thought had gone into it, and like there were like with every track there were like constant changes or like yeah, it was like really impressive.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying so. It's definitely I wanted to kind of have a bit of a journey across the course of the album. Like my favorite albums are the ones where you can put it on and you get like massive range of dynamics and like peaks and troughs of like emotions and sounds. So I was just trying to emulate that kind of style essentially, and it's good to know that I at least to some extent managed to pull that off. And it makes me kind of it gives me a lot of drive to do something similar but more interesting and more exciting for whatever comes next. Just based on the reaction to this and how much people do seem to be enjoying it. Yeah, it's been really lovely. People have been super sweet about it. I still don't really know how to react when people are like, "Oh, this is my favorite album of August," or "This is going on my end of year list." I'm like, thanks."
Yeah.
Like, I just I don't know what to say.
I liked the fact that you could hear the different genres at points.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the Dwaro Delph release from earlier in the year, where it sounds like proper modern metal, where it takes bits of everything and makes it into its own unique sound.
Yeah, like there were definitely like some riffs that would come in like on like the second track, is it Idolater?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Yeah, like there were like elements of that that almost sounded like metalcore or something like that, but like at the same time not detracting from that kind of like black metal vibe that kind of is like a through line through the whole album. Like it was cool.
That song in particular is one that people have picked up on and be like, how did you put like a metalcore breakdown in the middle of this without completely destroying the track? And honestly, I don't fucking know. It just worked out.
Yeah.
The it was always kind of, as much as I've said like there wasn't a plan. As I was kind of writing the tracks, I was like, I want to try and get as many of my influences into this as I can, like from all the styles that I love, the different bands that I've played in over the years, like take little bits and pieces and just try and kind of mash them all together. And I thought it would come out sounding a lot more kind of unhinged
Yeah.
than it actually ended up as. And like on paper, that shouldn't work, right? So I'm just glad that I managed to pull it all together. There's
Oh,
there's everything from like metalcore and like hardcore and punk to super ambient stuff to like in my head trip hop elements. Obviously a lot of black metal. I intentionally more kind of black metal than was on some of the previous releases. I wanted to go heavier and faster for certain points
yeah.
than I'd done before. And those were the most fun to write for sure. And probably still my favorites on the record.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then yeah, I didn't really start putting the track list like together necessarily until I started writing the title track, which was the last one that I finished, and I was like, right, this is the only one this is definitely going to be the last track on the record. This is going to be the big fucking finale, you know. Um, and I think you can kind of hear that in that track that I was like, that was very intentionally going to be the end of the record. Um, yeah, it's all been a bit of a trial and error process, and there were lots of trials and lots of errors, but it all thankfully came together pretty well in the end.
yeah, like one track that like really stood out to like it's not necessarily maybe like the heaviest, fastest, or most fun, but like it surprised me because it was almost like I was wondering if I'd accidentally like mixed like a Godspeedy Black Emperor song like into the mix like at some point, but it was the Last Empire. I was just like, oh wow, this like actually feels like it could like belong on a Black Emperor album or something like that. Like it's
I mean,
really
I take
cool.
that as a huge compliment. Obviously, thank you. Yeah, that was the weirdest one on the record for sure. And I even as I was writing it, I was like, where the fuck am I going with this? Like, what is this track going to be by the time I finish it? Um, but then it all kind of came together in a way that felt quite natural for me in the end, and I wanted this big, like, epic fucking climax. And as soon as I heard I think I just was scrolling through something, Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and I found that the sample that I used by Dr. Dario Wasfi, who's a physicist and like an Iraqi American activist who's been very, very vocal, clearly, as you can hear from the song, about
Mm.
the West's kind of role in genocidal acts, essentially. Um, and the delivery and the kind of the way she's very matter of fact about it, but you can hear there's like real passion and real anger in her voice. Was just I was like, I'm using this for something. This needs to be sampled. I need to use this as like the basis of a track. And again, yeah, I think for something that was built kind of so sporadically and without necessarily having an end goal in mind, it all came together pretty well by the end of it.
Well, I think you fooled me definitely. Like I thought that there was like it looks from the outside that there was a lot more planning maybe that went into it than
It's
maybe you know now.
I'm glad that that's how it came across. Like obviously there were like I would, occasionally I would write a part and be like, oh, okay, this gives me a cool idea for later and how I'm going to tie this all together. But when I first started writing the tracks, I think I started writing. I think Iron Price was the first one that I started writing probably nearly 3 years ago now,
Mm.
which is the one that's like 12 and a half minutes and change. And that was just to see if I could write a song that long and have it make sense and have it feel like one song as opposed to lots of different
Yeah,
parts
like
just kind of smushed together.
yeah, like go on a
Um,
riff salad.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and arguably that song is absolutely riff salad, but it's somehow still, at least to me, and apparently to some other people too, still sounds like cohesive and still part of like a wider whole. So yeah, I'm quite proud of myself for pulling that off with with very little forward planning.
I know I absolutely wasn't calling it a riff salad. I just meant like I
Oh no,
understand
I know
the
you
yeah.
weren't. I was calling it a riff salad.
Okay. Just wanted to make that clear.
I wanted to touch on the samples though, because you mentioned Iron Price, and that is the one that has the massive sample in it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
got a sample at the beginning. Yeah.
Because you mentioned about finding it on YouTube. Like, I wanted to ask how you found your samples and like what the criteria was, and like, what was it just a case of you found something and thought, I want to use this?
I thought it was the Last
Occasionally it'll
Empire that had
be
that.
so the
Um,
Last Empire is kind of built around a sample. Iron Price has a long sample at the beginning,
Mm.
and then the track starts.
okay, sorry, I was just getting confused for a
It's
second.
Dawntreader standard at this point. I use a lot of
Yeah.
samples. I quite like doing it. And there's always been like, I guess, two schools of thought when it comes to doing that sort of stuff. Um, I either will hear something, read something, watch something, and go, "That's fucking cool. I'd really like to use that for something." And then essentially, I've got like, huge reams of bookmarks and saved pages of stuff, and YouTube speeches and TED talks and all kinds of different stuff, and book readings, whatever, just all saved to go as something that's like inspired me or moved me or made me think differently about a subject, and gone, right, okay, I'm going to save that. Maybe I'll use it for something later. But occasionally there's things like the speech by Dahlia Wasfi Dr. Dahlia Wasfi, I should give her a credit,
Hmm.
in Last Empire, or the Black Mirror speech, which is at the beginning of Iron Price. It's from season 1 of Black Mirror, which is maybe not as anti-capitalist now as when it started out. It was a bit more sort of revolutionary, maybe not revolutionary, that's a strong word, but you know what I mean? It was a lot more kind of subversive in its first season than
Yeah.
it became later on. Um, and that speech was Daniel Kaluuya, who ended up being like an Oscar-winning actor a few years later. And I remember watching that first season on TV and being just blown away by how fucking emotive that speech was, and the delivery, and how he fucking like felt everything that he was saying. I just thought it was incredible, and I was like, all right, that's going in the list. I'm definitely gonna use that for something. Um, and then that kind of informed the theme of the song too. When I knew that was going to form part of the intro, obviously working on lyrics for Dawntreader is something that I've not done before, so this was the first time I was doing this too. Essentially, um, it kind of informed that to the point where it kind of picked the theme of the song for me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense, and that became like the big anti-capitalist feature on the record.
Yeah, it was like going into it, I was expecting it to be like sort of like almost I thought it was gonna be like a homage to like sort of the Ironborn in Game of Thrones. Because they always
I
talk
mean,
about
it
like
is a
paying
Game
the
of
Iron
Thrones
Price.
reference,
Yeah.
so yeah, you're halfway there. Yeah, um, there's a few sneaky little references to different like literature and films and video games and books and all kinds of stuff kind of dotted around through the album, and I'm always curious to see which ones people pick out and which ones they don't. So yeah, you're right. That one was literally a Song of Ice and Fire reference.
But I think what's kind of cool that I've like picked up on throughout the album is that yes, you'll have these like possibly like nerdy fantasy references, whatever, that all like or like this like kind of like almost like theatrical fantasy-esque language, but you're describing very much real life political concerns. But you'll use, kind of use like the language of black metal and the kind of like, overly fantastical language that's used in a lot of it to kind of like
Yeah,
tie it
that
together.
was
Like
kind of
it's
semi, as with a lot of things on this record, that was kind of semi intentional. It was obviously I've been writing lyrics for Viatorum for quite a long time. And I find myself using a lot of like Christian imagery, a lot of metaphor based on biblical, particularly Catholic,
mm,
iconography and stuff like that. And I just lent into that way more for Dawntreader because, as you say, that's kind of one of the languages of black metal, right? Is
yeah.
kind of steeped in not like archaic language, but a kind of old fashioned way of speaking, particularly like biblical verses. And I wanted to kind of emulate that as much as possible, but without being too flowery, without being too sort of opaque about what it was I was actually talking about. Like I did want to make it clear, like there's, Iron Price ends with no gods, no masters. I wanted to not have any debate necessarily about what side I fall on, despite using some pretty archaic language every now and again.
No, like it's like it sounds like it's like a bit of a difficult line to tread, but at the same time it's done well. And I kind of like it's it's something that you do, and also that I found like Dawn Raid did really well, like when they were still an active band and whatnot. But like yeah, they take the kind of like you said, like archaic languages. Oh, sorry. I've just got off work, so I'm just kind of like a bit brain fried. But like they take like archaic languages and use like medieval imagery or like whatever, but then like tie it to like issues of like, like maybe like refugees, climate, capitalism, like but it works.
I Now you mention it, yeah, you're absolutely right. They probably had more of an influence on me than I realized when it came to the lyric writing. I specifically didn't seek out lyrical influence, I guess, from other black metal bands. I kind of
Mm.
just took what I knew about black metal and was like, all right, what is my version of that sound like? And obviously that's going to be massively influenced by the media that I consume and the bands that I listen to. But being compared to Dawntreader is never a bad thing, so I'll take that quite happily.
No, like yeah, like it was 100% meant as a compliment. So
Sorry, I just wanted to touch on the samples again one last time. Because do you ever find like you'll use a sample and it doesn't fit with a song? Because like it sort of I'd imagine has to have like a cadence to it and like a rhythm. Because I couldn't imagine writing like a song and putting a Slavoj Žižek like monologue in there. It just wouldn't work. Unless
Oh
you
man,
timed the sniffs with the
oh
I'd
no,
really
yeah,
like to hear
like
someone try though. That would be great.
oh no,
Maybe
you
I'll try
just
that for album number two. I'll give that a shot to let you know how I get on.
absolutely just like time like each sniff for like a snare or
yeah.
something like that. Like
Just sample it and just have it on a pad.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm sorry, my mind's run away with me with that idea now. Um, there's a fair bit of manipulation that goes on to those samples. They're very rarely sort of just directly lifted and thrown into the track. There's a lot of stuff that has to be kind of cut and paste and occasionally slowed down or very occasionally sped up. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of back and forth, and those parts probably take the longest to like nail in the writing. I say the writing process is more slipping the samples into something that's already been written. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of chopping and changing, and thankfully I've been working with my producer long enough now that he just knows what I'm trying to achieve, and it's like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. Right, here's how we're going to get around this particular hurdle that happens occasionally. Um, so yeah, again, it's all semi-intentional. I really want to stop using this phrase. I feel like I'm selling myself a little bit short, but that's the truth of it. Honestly, it was where can I fit this in? How am I going to make it fit in? Um, and I have quite a lot of fun making that work. And then when it all comes together, I'm like, okay, that's the atmosphere that I was going for. Where does the rest of the song go from here now?
I mean, I don't think it's selling yourself short because, like in any kind of creative process, things develop along the way. Like it's like kind of like as you're writing, inspiration could strike even if you've got like a complete like roadmap of what you want to do with the thing. Just like midway through recording, I would imagine like just like an idea to take a complete left turn or something like that could, it's an ongoing organic process, I guess, until you actually finish the mix and kind of, actually get it out there to people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There were definitely points where I kind of completely changed course or course corrected maybe based on kind of a brainwave, I guess, and being like, oh shit, maybe I should try this. And then it turns out to work way better than what I was trying before. So there's definitely, yeah, there was a lot going back and forth. And as I was saying before, it was a lot of the intent was just to see if I could pull this off and make it a cohesive piece of music and just to write music that I wanted to hear, I guess, more than
Yeah.
anything, and to like pull the favorite parts of bands that I love or artists that I love and some of their songs where I'm like, oh, I wish they'd done this in this part of that song. That would have been perfect. It's like, all right, I'll fucking write that.
Yeah.
And see how it turns out. And yeah, so there's definitely a lot of homage, but there's hopefully enough originality into it too that I'm not going to get accused of ripping too many people off. Which honestly, the only person I've been weirdly been accused of ripping off was in like one of the few negative comments I've got, which there's been a few, which is to be expected. You can't please everybody. There was one guy in the comment section of the Angry Metal Guy review who said, "This sounds like a Coldplay ripoff, sub 2000s Laters Up band." With edgy, overproduced Atmo Black samples over the top. And honestly, I was pissing myself laughing. I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever read in my life. Because once he said it, I could kind of hear it, you know? It's like, shit, now you say that. Yeah, no, yeah, I see where you're coming from, man. Like,
I'm still completely like No, but
like when
I
it
thought it
goes
was
back?
great.
but no, like I'm probably gonna like go home and listen to the album again tonight and then be like, ah.
Now see, now you've heard that opinion, you won't be able to get rid of it. It'll be there kind of lurking in the back of your head every time you listen to it.
Yeah, like no, like I like my takeaway from the album was it being like incredibly fresh. Like there were definitely moments where I was like, it's a bit like Alcest, it's a bit like this, and kind of, like those influences, but that kind of like actual kind of like melting pot of all of those things together, I've not heard anything executed quite that way. And like even like with the heavy reliance on samples, things like that, it almost I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there's a neo folk band called Rome. Um,
Not really my thing. I've not experimented with a lot of neofolk in my time.
it's very, very much heavily reliant on kind of like samples, atmosphere, drones, kind of that might possibly like it, but it's also like firmly rooted in like sort of dark folk music and stuff. Um, like and like yeah, I kind of got lost midway through there, but I was trying to just kind of like say that it kind of like reminded me of that in like a lot of ways, but at the same time, it never so much leaned on one influence that I felt, it very much felt like its own thing and very refreshing.
I think that's the thing with metal though, that it's always like I was thinking of like Lamp of Murmur when you listen to them and you go, this sounds like Immortal. Oh, this bit sounds like Bathory,
Yeah,
but it sounds like Lamp of Murmur. It doesn't sound like
Lamp of
that, but you get that from listening to it because it's like with metal you have this like whole background of things you compare it to, and that's how you. It's making me think of film studies now and how you view media, and it's I'm going off on a tangent in my head, but it's like a thing where it's all self-referential, so you are going to pick things out.
Yeah, I mean, like even when we're like writing music, it'll be like, okay, then go from the Agalloch thing into the Bathory riff, and then like like because it's like very clear what one of us was listening to when we wrote that riff.
Yeah, there were definitely I like when I was kind of talking back and forth with my producer, or even just referring parts to myself. It would always be, oh, the Dodds right part in this song, or the Death Heaven part in this song, and they go, oh yeah, I know which bit you mean, just immediately. So again, yeah, I think everyone's, you know, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I think we're all always going to, as creatives, kind of emulate our influences to a certain extent, and then it's just where you go from there, I think. And then do you do something different with it, or do you just end up as kind of like a hero worship band? um
Yeah.
and or you do what I did, which is just try and put all your influences on one record and hope that it works. I think part of that was like I didn't really expect this many people to be listening to it, so I felt very little pressure
Yeah.
to make a particular kind of album. I kind of just did whatever I wanted. um and
But I
then lots of
mean,
people ended up listening to it. So now, like, I don't know what I'm going to do next.
I
but I
I've
suppose
mean,
absolutely no idea.
it makes it more authentic when you've just gone, this is what I want to make. I
yeah,
think people resonate with that.
for sure. And I was gonna say like I definitely think you are selling yourself short a little bit there because I think just because you were kind of like with like complete sincerity, just kind of it wasn't, obviously there's a skill to pairing all of those different influences and knowing where the right moment is, how to construct it and stuff like that. Like it's not just throwing everything you like at a wall and hoping that it sticks. Like I know that you're kind of like partially joking when you're saying that, but I do think you're selling yourself a little bit short there.
Partially, but there is definitely an element of imposter syndrome sunk in over the
Mhm.
last couple of weeks. Just some of the comments and like messages I've got, and like just really bizarre, surreal things like Panopticon sharing it with his on his
Yeah.
Instagram story. Things that I'm just like nearly shat when I saw that. Like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm definitely like feeling a bit of like fraudulent, honestly, at the moment. I think that's probably coming through in some of the things that I'm saying. And you know, maybe you're right. Maybe I am selling myself short. But I also just know what the process was when I was making the record, and it was literally just throw. Um, and yeah, the fact that this many people have decided that it does work and it's something that they want to keep listening to is yeah, kind of weirdly heartwarming
Mm.
for a black metal record, you know.
But if you maybe considered that you're just getting a chance to peek behind the curtain now, and that actually like this is probably the process for a lot of the bands that you do love, and maybe possibly they're feeling the same kind of imposter syndrome that you are. And it's
Yeah,
just
I've definitely
yeah,
had that thought in the last few weeks. Yeah, for sure. I imagine everyone who gets even a little bit of attention or good press or good reviews or whatever feels a little bit like I'm feeling currently.
I suppose it reminds me of like, when you're a kid and you think your parents know everything, and then you get to that age and you're like, I don't know anything. And you ask your parents now and you're like, yeah, we still don't know anything. And
yeah.
everyone's
It's
just
exactly
winging
that.
it.
Yeah, like I've had the opportunity to interview some of my favorite musicians who I think are like absolute geniuses, and then to hear them being like as humble as you are being like right now, I think you never really escape that. And then like maybe if you do escape it, you go too far the other way and then end up being a complete egotist or something. But
Well, like there's an element of intentionality to it. I've always kind of despised like rock star behavior and like rock star egos. I think because
mm,
coming up in like hardcore and punk and stuff specifically, you just get ousted for that kind of behavior. Everyone will be like, "What a fucking asshole! I'm not listening to anything he's doing. You're just a
yeah.
guy with a guitar. You're not special. Just play the fucking music. And if you're good at it, people will flock to you. Hopefully." Um, and yeah, I think there's probably an element of that coming through to it as well. Like I don't like rock star bullshit. I don't like egos in my music as much as possible. Obviously, some people with massive egos have given us some incredible work, but
Mm.
a lot of people are just way too fucking full of themselves. And they put a lot more stock into what they create than they arguably should. Um, and then coming at it with a little bit of humility is probably a more sensible and more endearing option, whether it's intentional or not.
Oh no, it absolutely is. And it's a more, it makes you a more pleasant individual to speak to, but also like kind of at the same time, I guess, like I want to kind of like assure you and say that no, it really is that good. Like people aren't just blowing smoke up your ass, like don't worry.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Keeping things grounded for me.
So the album's called Bloom and Decay. So it's obviously about life and death, which then makes me think of the music video. Obviously that was you walking around. I'm assuming it was you. You can't really see you the whole time, but like round a forest, and there's like all like the trees and the corpses and stuff. Like, how did you make that video? Was that just a case of you just went out and shot it and conveniently found all these rotting corpses? Or was it like, did you scout it out? Or it was
You've definitely
Well, so that's partly
that was my
what.
first.
you've definitely described it better than how you first described the video to me. You were like, it's just him walking around looking at dead shit. It's like, what?
To be fair, so that's kind of partly why there's a disclaimer in the YouTube blurb about the video saying no animals were harmed in making this video. I didn't want anybody
I
thinking
assumed you
we
didn't go and
we
kill some animals.
created any of those corpses. And it's also important to point out that me and the various corpses were never in the same place at the same time. So while none of that video is stock footage, it's all footage that's owned and was shot by the director, editor, cameraman, Mr. Henry A.K. Smith, who's one of my oldest friends. We've worked together on numerous projects, but this was the first time he got actively involved in the Dawntreader side of things, and it was an absolute pleasure working with him. I'd highly recommend him for any bands who are looking for a music video, because that was the first time he'd ever shot anything even approaching black metal, and I think he knocked it out of the fucking park. And he somehow made a really cathartic video without really having any frame of reference other than what I told him. So just hats off to him. He's a true artist. Um, Conceptually, it was essentially me kind of finding a good place to lie down and die. That was kind of the idea about it, and like returning to the earth, returning to nature, knowing that like or the feeling that like the earth might reject me or us as a species because of all the terrible things that we've done to the planet in our very short space of time really existing on it.
Mm.
And this idea of balance between life and death and like necessary sacrifice, and uh, the earth kind of existing as this almost like a tangible deity, like it's something that we've all drawn from and something we'll all return to eventually. But does it want us back after everything that we've done? That was kind of the concept behind it, and we shot hours and hours and hours of footage of me traipsing around my local woods, which is gorgeous. It was lovely. It was a really nice day. And then we sat and went through a lot of the footage that Henry had taken from his trips abroad. So there's some footage from Mexico, there's some footage from Ireland, there's some from France. And we kind of went, all right, this one will work here. Let's splice these two together. Let's crossfade these. I say he did the majority of this. He's a great editor, and I was just kind of getting in the way. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, and I think essentially it's for a video that was kind of shot on absolutely no budget. And it was all kind of either existing footage that we had that hadn't been used for anything previously, but thematically slotted quite nicely into what we were trying to achieve, or the brand new footage of me in the woods. Yeah, it came together remarkably well. I think I've only shot music videos with Viatorum before, and that's been still small production, but it'll have a bigger crew. It'll have like lighting rigs and multiple people working on it. This was just me and my best mate in the woods, and it came out. Yeah, like I say, I'm still really impressed with how it all turned out. And it was nice to be able to do that. It kind of made the album feel a little bit more grand. The fact that I was able to do a music video before the album itself came out, it kind of was like, oh shit, this is real now. Like, I've got a fucking album coming out in a couple of weeks. I just dropped
I
a
think
music
it
video.
really,
It was sorry, go
yeah,
on.
it really set the tone as well for the album, I think. Like it was a really well shot video. And like I know I said it was just you walking around the woods with some dad stuff, but I think that's a good summation. But like thematically it really ties into the album. It was really like, oh, this song's really good. And obviously it was the first time hearing like your vocals on a Dawntreader track. So it was pretty interesting to get a window into the album.
Like,
Yeah, that's kind of why I picked that track to shoot the video for. I thought it had the most kind of um some of the more rich like subject matter on the album once I'd written the lyrics, and one that was achievable on the budget and the equipment and the just time that we had essentially to try and pull it off. Um, yeah, I specifically chose it because I thought it would be a good kind of introduction to the album, particularly with the vocals as well, which obviously no one, unless you've listened to my other stuff, no one who was a Dawntreader fan previously had any idea what I was going to sound like. So it was good to be able to pick a track that kind of encapsulated a lot of what else was going to be going on the record.
I was like curious to know if you do like the Viatorum kind of like vocal, which is like obviously a lot um chestier than necessarily like stereotypical like black metal vocals would be. Like you're not doing like this shrill shrieking kind of
Oh,
thing.
I
Yeah.
tried to do the whole black metal shriek thing. It turns out I just can't do it. So
Oh, I was gonna say it was actually refreshing having a different style of like vocal to it, but yeah.
yeah, I guess I've been doing vocals seriously for maybe 6 or 7 years now, in the style that I'm currently doing them with Viatorum and I guess Dawntreader to an extent. Um, and I sort of knew that I wanted to try something different with Dawntreader from Viatorum to kind of separate those two projects. Viatorum is all about aggression and rage and that kind of catharsis, whereas Dawntreader is much more about a sort of melancholic kind of
Yeah.
catharsis, I guess, and more kind of hopeful and more kind of sad, but like kind of weirdly happy at the same time,
Well, no,
which is
that's
something Viatorum just doesn't exist within that space, which
well,
is a lot
there
more
there are
angry all the
definitely
fucking time.
there are definitely like sorry, because you just reminded me of a point I wanted to make in the podcast about how there are those like moments that actually feel like hopeful and I don't know if like cathartic's the right word, but like there is like the kind of the only way I can describe it is saying it gave me the DSPM weighted blanket crying in your bed kind of feeling of like like the warm comforting feeling that you get from that.
I like that description.
Yeah.
I like that
Like,
description a lot.
I don't
That
know
wasn't necessarily what I was going for, but I'm very happy to hear that that's a feeling that it created with you.
because I can
That's
never
definitely a
kind of
big
like
compliment.
figure out when bands like Life Lover will do it and like other bands like that where it does have like that uplifting quality to it. Are you switching to a major key? Because it still sounds like minor, but it's somehow still got like this weird like sort of like tinge of like hope or something. It's a bit hard to describe.
That's definitely something I think there are points on some of my earlier releases where I got close to achieving that sound, um, to like varying levels of success. And when I was writing the album, particularly with like the title track, for example, it was like, right, I'm intentionally specifically trying to elicit this emotion here,
Mm.
or this range of emotions at least. Um, because that's something I really enjoy, particularly about seeing like black metal live. I think is again, black metal being a massive umbrella term at this point.
Yeah.
You're not going to necessarily get that feeling from like Spectral Wound, for example.
Yeah.
They're not there to make you feel like happy and fun, as much as they are a fun band to see live.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that kind of catharsis that you get from, or like I specifically found previously in, as you were saying, like major key black metal stuff. So like, there's
Yeah.
something about bands playing like major key chords over blast beats that just fucking hits different. I don't know how else to describe it, but like I think one of the first times I ever heard that was a band who I've since found out have got some pretty sketchy ties, which was really disappointing. Sayer from Scotland. They
Oh
got a lot of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah. That was my exact reaction when I found out about their connections to like Dark and the Black and stuff. That was
yeah.
rough. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie,
Because
because they
didn't
were a
he
pretty big
release
influence
it?
on me getting started.
Didn't he release it through a DSBM, an
NSBM.
NSBM, two NSBMs?
So yeah, their first album came out, I think, through Darker Than Black. It was
Yeah,
Callum from Tyrannus let me know about that. And I was like, oh
yeah. Wasn't it
fuck, that's embarrassing. I was a huge fan.
the same album with a different title, and then he released it a week later with a different title but the same album cover?
Yeah, basically to
Something like
try and
that.
like
Yeah.
avoid it. And it's he's not the first person to do that as well. Like I could be wrong, isn't there? Like didn't Eldamar release like their first album literally with the same artwork but like under a different name or
That
something
might
like
be what I'm
that?
thinking of, maybe.
Because like you can find it like literally same artwork of like that big horizon with the cliffs and stuff like that, but it was released on a much dodgier label and kind of they got a huge backlash and then they kind of but yeah, circling back like that uplifting feeling, like I also get that from like bands like like Gallow Braid or even like some Agalloch stuff like Falling Snow or something like that. Like it's uplifting and it genuinely feels
Hmm.
like that kind of especially if you place it in the right point of a song or album where you've been through you've been through all the kind of like turbulent parts of it and it's almost like feeling like that moment of clarity maybe possibly after you've had like a very upsetting episode and then you've kind of like vented all of those feelings and then there is that like exhalation and the kind of okay
Yeah, that kind of experience was something I was definitely trying to craft. And again, it sounds like it had the intended effect on quite a lot of
but
listeners, which made me really happy to hear that.
Well, yeah, that's entirely why I'm bringing it up because it did hit me like that, and I kind of was like, I will. That's why I was kind of quizzing you. Like, is it the use of major key? What is it that kind of provides that kind of like?
I feel like a
I think
similar
there are
feeling.
parts where
Oh,
I
sorry.
very intentionally again, the last track is entirely in a major key, and that was very intentional.
Hmm.
Um, or at least the chords are. I think some of the leads maybe slip into minor keys. I don't know keys that well, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
I'm not really that very good about that sort of stuff. I just kind of play stuff and see if it sounds good.
Yeah.
Um, but I think a lot of the time with the rest of the album, the parts where I was finding like catharsis and the stuff I was writing was the kind of it was more about atmosphere and it was more about kind of tension and release and like dynamics and peaks and troughs of like kind of
Yeah.
like what you were saying where like it builds and builds and builds to a crescendo essentially.
Hmm.
um, and that crescendo could go one of several different directions and there's different ways to kind of reach that point. And I guess a lot of the record was me trying to figure out what different crescendos I could try and replicate and achieve.
Hmm. No, no, like that, no, for sure. And it's like, sorry, this is kind of one of those things where it's not just trying to like hurl compliments at you, but like as I said, like we were like impressed with the previous releases, and then like for it to be such a step up, we were like I think I said to you when I heard it the first time I messaged you, like I was actually getting annoyed how it was just like one good riff after another. Like it was just like how are you fucking doing this? Like
I
Man,
just
as
wanted
soon as
to
I figure it out, I'll let you know.
yeah.
I just wanted to go back to the thing about like the blast beats. One of my favorite things is when you have a riff that's like not very fast and the riff won't change, but the blast beats will come underneath and it just completely changes a song.
Yeah,
Like that's some of like my favorite black metal stuff.
it's almost like kind of like that was something that took me ages to learn, like when playing music, that it's not just about what's being played necessarily, like say the guitar, it's how it sits around everything else and kind of like what you're doing in relation to everything else has a huge impact. And like you always take it as bullshit when people use phrases like, "Oh, it's also about the notes you don't play" and things like that. And then it's like, as you get older, that actually makes sense and stuff like that.
Yeah, you definitely start to understand it a little bit more what people mean by phrases like that as the more you try and write your own music, I guess. And you're
Yeah.
like, okay, what am I doing wrong here? And you're like, okay, brainwave. I think I figured it out. But to tie on to what you were saying there, Liv, I want to take that opportunity just to shout out my producer, Pip Gurney, who is also the guitarist in Beer Torum, which is why he's my producer. He did easily his best work with this record. He did like months of research. I was sending him stuff, being like, right, sit down, listen to this record. There are parts of this that I would think would work really well for what we're trying to do. He went off on his own. He discovered new bands that he liked. He, watched movies that I recommended. He listened to clips. He was very involved in this process in a way that we hadn't really tried for previous releases. It was very much just me. I'd send him the tracks. We'd work on it. At this point, it was a much more kind of collaborative process to evoke certain feelings and certain atmospheres and emotions, and what was going to be the best way to do that, both in terms of the songwriting and the production on the final product. Um, yeah, he put in some seriously fucking hard graft to this record, so I just want to shout him out while I get a good chance.
No, that's actually like a really cool relationship to have that, especially as like a solo project. I suppose it's like it's difficult to find that ability to bat ideas back and forth and stuff like that if it's all, if it's all you. So maybe you're getting the quality, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds there when you've got that relationship with the producer where you do have almost like the sounding board of having a writing partner, but at the same time, it's still your baby and
Yeah, definitely. There were, I wasn't getting like sending him riffs and being like, what do you think of this? It was more like I'd send him a completed section of a song and being like, okay, what do you think about the production for this part? Because here's what I thought might work. And
mm,
him being actually a producer would be able to give me kind of a detailed breakdown of what parts would work, what parts wouldn't, what he would do in if it was his song. And just having that kind of free flowing conversation go back and forth, I think was super helpful for me. Just in the kind of last couple of months where we were, I guess, really constructing it and actually doing the production on the finished tracks. Just having that freedom to go back and forth, and the fact that I wasn't paying him for multiple passes probably helped. Get you a friend who can produce your music for free. They are fucking invaluable.
So usually we obviously do the 5 songs thing, which because you've been on the podcast before. It's like, what were the 5 tracks which influenced this album? Obviously, you said that you and your producer were like listening to certain things. Like, what was the creative process listening wise going into this?
Uh, I think it was less. I want to sound like this, and this, and more kind of trying to find a way of like summing up my influences and the various disparate things that I listen to, which shouldn't really fit together. But I decided I was going to try and make them.
yeah,
Um,
distilling
so
them
it's
to yeah.
yeah, like that's why there's some metalcore influence on there. That's why there's some like DB influence on there. There's some hardcore stuff. There's it was literally just throwing everything together and seeing what worked. I did prepare 5 songs that I made sure were different from the last 5 that I gave you, but they
Mhm.
weren't necessarily songs that influenced me specifically for this record, more just songs that have influenced me over, I guess, the course of my music career, and just some new shit that I've been jamming that I think deserves a few more eyes on it as well.
Okay.
You ready? I can
Yeah, yeah,
start
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
pumping them out. All
Hit
right.
us with it.
I tried to memorize them, didn't do a great job. So, all right, first up, we've got Love Lost in a Hail of Gunfire by Bleeding Through, from their 2003 record, This Is Love, This Is Murderous, which was pretty formative for me. I think that intro sample, again, that was probably an influence on me too, of Willem Dafoe just screaming his fucking lungs out from the Boondock Saints. For me, that's like one of the most iconic metal intros just ever put to record. Um, and it was from that era where like metalcore bands were kind of experimenting with some black metal aesthetics and black metal sounds. There was like them and 18 Visions and Himsa, and lots of bands who were like, yo, what if we did black metal but make it have breakdowns? Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Bleeding Through, I think, were one of the few bands who managed to pull it off in like a cohesive way that kind of made sense. And I don't know if they ever actually broke up, but they definitely kind of went on a bit of a hiatus, and they've recently gotten back together and they're touring They were touring the 20-year anniversary of this album, which I didn't get to see. I was pretty gutted about. But
Are
that
they
was huge
playing
for me
Damnation or
as a kid.
Invader?
They are playing Damnation. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
actually think they're
Okay.
playing This Is Love in full at that. Now
Yeah.
you've said that, so I might have to go and cop a ticket immediately after this interview's done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was huge for me growing up. I think I was 13, 14 when that record came out. And that for me in quite a big way. Um, and yeah, to my hearing, there are definitely elements of that kind of style that kind of slip into Bloom and Decay a little bit, whether intentionally or otherwise. But it was just a band that's always been kind of on my radar, and they were a huge influence on me when I was younger. So I think they must probably still be influencing me to a certain degree, you know. One that was definitely more immediately influential would be I don't know how to pronounce this band's name, so I'm just going to say it the way it looks. I think I already said it at one point, and I probably said it wrong too. Dodds
Oh
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea
I know who
what
you're referring to.
but
I
So
think it's
yeah, I figured you probably would. So I was hoping you could give me the correct
no,
pronunciation, but I don't think any of us know it.
for anyone who's listened to the radio show, the second I see like an umlaut or an accent over it, I'm just like, I'm sorry, but
I think it's Dawntreader because I interviewed Shape of Storm's records that put out the vinyl of it. And I think it's Dawntreader. I think. I
All
think.
right, we'll go with that. That sounds the most legitimate out of any of the ways that I've pronounced it so
yeah,
far tonight. So we'll go with that. Dodrit. Okay. So the first track off their, well, I guess is their first EP. It's their first release on streaming services at the very least. Endless Circle from their self-titled EP. That was the first time I'd heard. I know it had been done before, and a lot of people would say it's been done better, but that was the first time I'd heard black metal and like hardcore slash kind of crust punk kind of
yeah,
blended together in that way, and it actually being super effective and like just energetic, and like it got me so fucking pumped up. I'd never heard anything quite like it before. Now that I've said this, I feel like when I was talking earlier about the dose rate part, people will now be able to figure out exactly
yeah,
which bit I was referring to. It's pretty fucking obvious if I'm being honest. But yeah, that was pretty huge for me, and that was me. I think I found them in maybe 2019, 2020, and that was I'd only really been getting into black metal for a couple of years at that point. Talked about last podcast. When I was younger, I kind of fucking hated black metal. I thought it was all theatrics and no substance. And it was only coming back to it as an adult, being like, oh, there's actually like a ton of stuff going on here, and it's such a varied scene, and there's so many different sounds and styles. And yeah, again, we talk about this before,
yeah,
but Dozery was definitely one of those bands where I was like, oh, you can do this too. That's fucking awesome. I didn't know you could do that. So since then, they've been one of my top five like black metal bands of the last 10 years, easily, I'd say.
yeah. I think like
Um,
coming
sorry,
from
go on.
you, I know I was just gonna say like I think like it's. I think I might have even said this on the previous podcast with you, but like it seems to be all of the people that are coming more from a hardcore and punk background that are then like later in life discovering black metal actually seems to be making the most interesting black metal that's coming out in recent years.
I mean, I
Like,
guess it makes sense. I think you can, there are bands obviously like again like Spectral Wound who are doing like a bit more of an old school, intentionally kind of old school style and vibe in terms of their aesthetics and their sound, which is great when it's done well. But then you do get legions of just clones and imitators who aren't really bringing anything new to the table. And I think without outside influences, just as a metal musician generally, I think without outside influences from other genres, from other things that you listen to, other media that you consume, if you're just trying to take influence from the things that you sound like, I think you're going to end up writing kind of a boring record, personally.
yeah,
So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that there's a lot of crossover with people who have maybe not grown out of hardcore, but like have kind of done that, been there, want something a little bit more spicy, a little bit more interesting. And because black metal is such a vast scene and there's so much sort of creativity and scope for exploration, I think it makes sense that there's a kind of like a hardcore to black metal pipeline,
No, and it also seems to be injecting like slightly better politics into black metal as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Which can only be a good thing. Definitely more of those kind of voices wherever we can get them.
Yeah, for certain.
Uh, All right, so next up, we've got another hardcore band. Well, I say another. Those right probably wouldn't appreciate me calling them a hardcore band, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So this is Eagles Become Vultures by Converge, however you prefer to say it, from one of their more maligned albums, which was "You Fail Me." It came out in 2004. It was the first time I'd ever heard them. I was a late comer to this band. I'd never heard. I didn't hear Jane Doe till I was like in my mid-20s, you know. But I remember specifically hearing this track. I think it was on like a. Do you guys remember when you used to get like Metal Hammer and they'd have
Yeah.
like DVDs with all the latest music videos on it because
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
a thing? And that was like a lot of the time, especially with more obscure bands, if they weren't getting played on like MTV2 or Kerrang or whatever, that was the only time you'd be able to see those music videos, you know, or bands who were like too heavy for TV, I guess.
Yeah.
So I just had never heard anything that unhinged, I think, in my entire life at that point. Whereas like the vocalist sounds like he's actively harming himself or other people. And just all the drums are so frantic and so pounding, and there's like this kind of unbridled energy to it that I just hadn't really experienced before. And I think when I heard that the drum fill that starts that song off, I was like, oh fuck, okay, I want to be a drummer now. It was like that. Um, and yeah, obviously, you know, I think despite them being like nominally a hardcore band, or I guess a metalcore band, depending on where you sit on that spectrum, I've never heard anyone have a bad word to say about Converge ever, regardless of what their music taste is. No one talks shit on Converge, and I think that's just an incredible achievement for that
Mm.
band. You know, they make everybody happy, and they make and yeah, no one talks shit, and I think I can think of very few bands who've managed to pull that off. And there's good reason for that. You know.
No, for sure. Like I was impressed by their Damnation set like a few years ago. That was actually talking about coming some later in life. That was my first intro to Converge. For some reason they'd always just sort of pass me by, and I think they were doing Jane Doe in its entirety that night as well. So like, yeah, that was like a really nice intro to them.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
only ever
mate,
listened.
that being your intro to Converge is insane. You lucky bastard.
I've
Well,
only ever listened to the Blood Moon album, which came out that year,
mm,
and I wasn't going to Damnation that year. And I was like, if Chelsea Wolf comes out on stage and they play that album, I would be upset. But luckily, it
she
didn't
didn't.
happen.
Yeah, it was the
I would
Jane
have been
Doe.
really upset if that happened.
Yeah.
I do. I fucking love that album too. To be fair,
Yeah, it's really good.
it stands out in their discography. And obviously just having Chelsea Wolf's voice over the top of for some reason, her and Jacob Bannon's vocals seem to go together way better than you'd expect. You actually just reminded me how much I loved that record when it came out. I've not listened to it for a while, so I think I'm going to go away and listen to it after this
A
interview.
similar record was the Thou record with Emma Ruth Rundell, and I was like, that had like a similar vibe to me, and I played that loads while I was playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skating came out, like near the remake. That was during COVID.
To pass the time during lockdown.
Yeah.
So moving on to track number 4. So this is I don't know an awful lot about this band other than they fucking rip. So if it turns out that you're fascist, I do apologize.
Right.
This is Hang by My Hand by Enforced, who
Oh no, they're
are
safe.
kind of like
Don't
they're
stress.
safe. I
Yeah.
figured they probably would be like thrash generally is like, or at least, yeah,
Deathy
generally
thrash,
speaking,
yeah, like
tends to be pretty lefty. There was obviously some outliers, there always will be, but yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Just I think I guess Power Trip are touring again now, but ever since they lost their front man, I think that we'd lost like one of the best, most powerful kind of crossover bands.
yeah.
And it feels like a lot of people were not intentionally or otherwise like trying to maybe take up the torch where Power Trip left off. And Enforced so far are the only band that for me even gets close to what Power Trip were able to achieve in like such a small space of time. Just the energy, the riffs. Oh my god, the riffs! They hit that special part of my soul. I'm not a big thrash guy generally, but I do really love crossover when it's influenced with like a healthy dose of hardcore.
I think that they're a bit more
Yeah,
cave.
from sorry, go on.
They're a bit more like caveman-y than like thrash. Like a lot of it will be like slower, chuggy riffs that just you want to pound your
That's the
fists
hardcore
to.
influence coming in.
Yeah,
That's where I live. That's a bit of me that.
yeah.
So yeah, it's like as much as I love those like really fast, thrashy, intense riffs, it's like what we've talked about a lot, where it's like dynamics and like peaks and troughs. It's the same reason I can't get into a lot of crust punk is because it's just all DB all the time and it never breaks into like a groove. But when you do it and you do it well, it hits completely different, and it just like you just get like completely fucking sucked into it. I think that's something. Obviously, they're not a DB band, but something that Enforced and I get a few other similar bands do really, really well, is taking that speed and aggression, but also knowing when to slow things down, and give you like a breakdown or maybe like more of a two-steppy part or just like a really fucking good groove,
Yeah.
which is something again you don't often get in thrash. So it's always enjoyable to hear those kind of styles spliced together for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You need those dynamics. Like as you said, peaks and troughs, tension and release. Like without it, I go to sleep.
I think it's kind of bleeding into hardcore as well. Like I know I've really been like enjoying the new Speed record, and that's got a similar-ish vibe.
Haven't heard it yet.
We played it on the radio the other week. I took over because I've been listening to a lot of hardcore lately, and I was just like, I'll just program this. And I put like 3 or 4 songs in, and I was like, why is this only like 10 minutes, if that, like less than 10 minutes?
Yeah.
It's because like Dry Socket and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, they're like 2 minute songs.
Sorry, that for some reason that like song title just like
No, it's a band.
no, okay, yeah, but like that just kind of made my skin crawl for its dry socket. But
That is a weirdly sort of safe for work, but extremely gross band name.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
it's not like brutal death metal, sort of as gory and over the top as possible, but it's still really fucking horrible.
yeah,
Respect,
exactly.
like nicely done.
It's vague enough for you to get away with, but specific enough to make me
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
when you drill into it a little bit, you're like, oh, that's horrible.
When you drill into a dry socket. Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
I probably could have phrased that one better. Sorry about
No, that's fine.
that. All right, so to round things out, this one might be a little bit more controversial, which is kind of why I picked it, because I think it might piss some people off. And like, I'm a rascal, I'm a stinker. I like doing that.
That's fine.
So this is Suffocate by Knock Loose featuring Poppy, which is easily the most mainstream pick. It can't be all obscure shit all the time. I've been a Knock Loose fan since basically the beginning of their career, and it's been like unbelievably satisfying to watch them go from like quite generic kind of beat down hardcore, but with enough like enough spice, enough of their own elements added into it, to keep it interesting and kind of immediately kind of raise them a cut above a lot of bands who are doing similar stuff. To they've got like nearly 2 million monthly listeners on Spotify now. They're doing like arena tours. Their last album went just stratospheric, and it's just really nice to see that kind of like representation. I think even if you're not into the style that they do, I know they're quite a divisive band. I know like Brian's vocals in particular are a big turn off for a lot of people. Personally, I fucking love it. I always have. But I think taking that notoriety and kind of hype that they were getting and doing something as arguably like risky as getting Poppy in to do a feature with them, was a really fucking bold move, and it paid off for them. They did gangbusters based on that. I think obviously you're kind of inviting in a whole new crowd who's maybe new to you before but is into what Poppy does. So they're going to like, oh, okay, who's this band that she's working with? And then just absolutely get their shit rocked.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. Like I think it kind of propels Not Loose to being like one of the more modern like gateway bands for younger fans who maybe don't know that much about metal, but they hear this and they go, fuck, I really liked that. I want some more of that, please. And maybe they wouldn't have gotten there if not for Poppy. It's also notorious because it's got that kind of like reggaeton beat halfway through, which is super fun. Never fails to get me like kind of like psyched up. And Poppy's screaming vocals are unbelievably good. Like for someone who made her name doing, as her name might suggest, much more kind of pop and influence and stuff. She is a fucking mean metal vocalist. There's a scream about halfway through the breakdown, which still, I've heard this song probably 100 times. It makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time because it's just so. Oh, I don't know. I don't know how.
Yeah.
You'll know it when you hear it though.
I'm glad you mentioned the Knock Loose album because I never really cared about them. And then some of our friends went to go see them and they had the shirts, and I was like, oh, I've never listened to them before. So I listened to the new album. I really, really like it. Everyone else I've mentioned it to hates it. But like when I heard like that Don't Reach For Me, I was like, that is such a good song.
I just haven't listened to them at all. So I just kind of, every time you've been trying to talk to me, I've just been a bit indifferent, like when it's come up.
And then there's that song with Chris Motionless as well, which is like super anti-capitalist. And I was like, wasn't expecting this. Because I was like really into Motionless in White as a teenager.
They've never particularly, at least in the lyrics that I've looked at, been a particularly political band one way or the other. And I guess like, anti-capitalism is sort of in 2024 maybe a little bit like entry level lefty stuff, but still even that, amplifying that kind of message and those themes to an audience of millions and millions of people can only be a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. If it's again, if they're talking about gateway bands, if it's music or if it's politics, that both is a good thing as
I
far
mean,
as
like I think
I'm
is like
concerned.
a, I think if like the basic, sort of like everybody's starting point now is kind of being disenfranchised for
Yeah.
capitalism at this point, that's only a good sign for things to
Yeah,
come.
I mean, I guess it makes sense because especially for like people like younger folks who, have seen multiple recessions, they've seen a global
Yeah.
pandemic, they've seen, uh, not world wars, but a world that's never really stopped being at war in any capacity. There's always wars going on somewhere else. Most of the time, they're being paid for by our taxes,
Yes.
and we're just doing the most inhumane things possible, and kind of
Yeah.
just then living our lives like day to day, like nothing else happens. There's always going to be a bit of you that knows how unnatural that is and how fucked up that is. And I think the first time you hear someone kind of give voice to that and explain it to you, whether that's a lot of the time is through music. And I think that can be a really, really helpful gateway
Yeah.
to more kind of, I don't want to say traditional leftist politics, but you maybe then you go away and you start reading anarchist authors, or you read Marx, or
Yeah.
you just go down a YouTube rabbit hole. Obviously, that's like quite a big gateway for a lot of people these days too, for better or worse.
Mm.
Yeah, so to see a band like Loose who are just could very easily not stand on any platform at all and just keep releasing just these heavy bangers to even at a kind of surface level start critiquing the systems that we live under, to an audience of, I guess, younger people. That can only be a good thing. So
Oh,
respect to them for trying to pull that off.
no, like
Stuff like this does
100%.
kind of worry me though. You read Mark Fisher and you talk about the capitalist realist stuff,
Yeah.
and when it's so mainstream to be like anti-capitalist these days,
Almost
it's a
well,
bit.
capitalism just absorbs
Mm,
anti-capitalism and somehow finds a way to market it. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like pink washing or greenwashing. It's just the kind of new
yeah,
version of that. It's like, it's kind of gotten to a point where it's like almost beyond satire when you've got like an Amazon produced and funded show like The Boys being explicitly anti-capitalist. I think
Yeah.
it's like there's a huge disconnect there for me. As much as I like the show, and I do think I guess the writers have got mostly decent politics, it's undercut slightly by how it's financed and how it's made.
I
You
think
know,
it's
I
funny that
suppose
it's
that's
taken
the
4 seasons for the people that it's taken the piss out of to realize that having the piss taken out
yeah.
of them. Like four
hey,
seasons.
wait a minute, they're
Are
laughing at
we
us.
the are we the
Are we the
baddies?
baddies? Yeah, it was a lot of people were complaining about that too, saying like, oh, the show's gone so obvious now, but like clearly people still weren't getting it,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy to me. They
I
had to
am,
be that obvious about it for
yeah.
in order for people to go, oh, you're laughing at me, fuck.
I mean, I think there's something to be said as well for using the kind of the tools of of the capitalist class. Like, you're using like a big platform that Amazon can afford you almost to seed those ideas that may one day in our wildest dreams be their undoing.
Yeah, there's definitely you can see that happening kind of in real time at the moment, where I guess there's like I don't know if it's a conscious effort, but the kind of establishment, the old guards, that legacy media, whoever it might be, being like, oh, people don't like us very much. How can we monetize this? It's become more and more obvious in the last few years, and hopefully, it leads to more people opening their minds up to like I say, actual leftist politics, and kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit deeper. Remains to be seen if that's the case, though. Unfortunately, I guess.
Just
Yeah.
more people to infight, I guess.
Yeah. But
More disagreements.
yeah, I'm a proponent of within reason leftist unity. Like, it's kind of like,
Yeah, of course.
if we're getting into, you know, justifications for like absolute like atrocities, but just because they were done by somebody carrying a red flag, it doesn't mean it make it
Mm.
okay. But like, I can tolerate and in good faith debate actual, debates about like, praxis and things like that, in the faith that we all want to achieve a more, equitable world and whatnot. But yeah, there are boundaries, like
I've been
Yeah,
reading the
absolutely. Yeah.
I've been reading the new Judith Butler book, and a lot of the stuff in that is about like you need to have like some kind of alliance on the left, even if you don't fully agree with each other, it's still easier. Not
Well,
easy. It's still more beneficial to have those disagreements and continue them later on than let us slide into
well,
eco-fascism, basically.
conservatives are great at like, kind of like closing ranks at times of elections or when they need to. It's like a kind of thing of they manage to create like even I think it might just be because they're not the left, so like kind of like their vote base, as long, like go back a couple of years, at least they're not voting for
Mm.
Corbyn,
I don't
like
know why I said
Mm.
eco-fascism as well. I mean literal just fascism.
well,
Like
it's
what
kind of
eco came
both. I mean,
Old
we are
fashioned
like
fascism.
we are like tiptoeing closer to eco-fascism, and like it's kind of a we're back onto it because like the last podcast we did, I also like went down a rabbit hole of talking about like anarcho-nihilism and like living on a dying planet and stuff, and I just bummed everyone out. But
So we'll avoid that by
yeah,
talking about the Viatorum tour. So, which is what I had to do last time. I was like,
yeah.
right, we'll go somewhere happier from this.
I'd been reading a lot of depressing
I
literature on
suppose
this one.
we could carry on some of the same segments from the last time.
Oh, yeah. So we've introduced like a few segments, and I think I'll come back like and talk about film in a second because you mentioned,
This one's superior, the
yeah, that
Western pronounced film.
this is kind of the one that you will be judged on whether we have a relationship kind of going forward at this point. Like I'm not trying to put too much of an emphasis on the point, but you will be judged online, possibly ostracized. So think carefully about this.
Okay, so no.
Um, who are your top three favorite Muppets?
Wow. Shit, I'm asking the real questions now. Uh, I'm not going to be able to remember their names. I'm going to get fucking crucified for this, man. This is going to be really bad. Um, Rizzo,
Yeah,
definitely he's up there.
that's
Um,
solid.
uh, not any particular reason. I just think he's funny. He's just a little
Huh?
goofball. I like him. Got a lot of time for him. Um, Gonzo as well. I guess they come
Oh,
as kind of a pair, which
Yeah.
or at
especially
least
in the
they at least
movies. Yeah.
I was yeah I was gonna say especially in the movies they seem to be the kind of often like the narrators of the story, which is a yeah, it's a bit a pattern that I always enjoyed as a kid. Going
Hmm.
back and watching Treasure Island or Christmas Carol like over and over again, which hold up unbelievably well considering when they were made. I
Oh,
watched them both. I watched
absolutely.
them both when we were in lockdown, and just like fuck, this hasn't aged a day. This is incredible.
I read a
Um,
fantastic quote about both of those films about the reasons that both films work is the reason Christmas Carol works is because Michael Caine treats the Muppets as fellow actors. The
yeah.
reason Treasure Island works is because Tim Curry treats them as fellow Muppets.
I hadn't heard the second bit of that. I've read about Michael Caine being like, no, I'm gonna do a serious um Dickens performance. And I
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned, I'm just doing like real
yeah.
acting,
I will play
being
this as
consciously
serious.
aware that all of your co-stars are made out of felt.
Yeah, I will play this as
And
seriously as a
knowing that
heart
you can,
attack.
and like again, knowing that when you watch that film, you can absolutely see that coming across. I've actually not watched Treasure Island in probably maybe a little bit longer than watching Christmas Carol. Um, I will need to go back and maybe do a little bit more research on that because as much as I love Tim Curry, that's not the performance that stands out for me when I think of him right now. Currently, it's him in Command and Conquer, playing like a Russian general going to spies. It's just immortal.
I'm going to escape to the last place that has not been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Solid impression, by the way, much better than
Oh,
mine.
thank you.
I owe you guys one more Muppet, don't I? Who's he's like a big orange dude. He's like super like long
Sweetums.
hair. That's the
The
one.
one that like comes in at the end of Treasure Island and you think he's a villain, but he like takes out the pirates. He's like, no, I love you
Yes.
guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. That's the one. Yeah.
Well,
Again, not for any particular reason. I just like his vibe.
well,
Good
that's
vibes.
interesting because me and Liv have the same three favorite Muppets, and
No way.
you named two of them. So
We swapped
Oh,
out Rizzo
nice.
for Kermit, so
yeah, it's Kermit Gonzo Sweetums for us. So
Solid
and
list, solid choices.
the
I
last
feel like
segment,
we're if and when we're judged by the internet, hopefully they won't judge us too harshly on these choices.
I think they're top picks. So
I agree.
we're not the
We are the tastemakers.
Yeah. But the last
In the
segment we come up
weird,
with is like,
in the weird interlocking Venn diagram of black metal Muppets enthusiasts, we
yeah,
reign supreme.
yeah. The last
Probably,
segment,
sorry, go on.
I was gonna say the last segment was like top four films, like or top five films, basically. Because I've
But
been obsessed with
Oh,
Letterboxd recently.
but if I can tweak the question ever so slightly, because you mentioned that you were sending films and media to your producer that inspired Bloom and Decay, possibly
What a
films.
great segue.
Thank you. Possibly the
nicely done. It's almost
films
like you
that
planned it.
We didn't.
we didn't.
We
We didn't.
didn't.
I am just that good. Um, but yeah, like which kind of like films and like pieces of media like that really fed into the album and create, whether it was just a vibe or an aesthetic or something that informed it.
Okay, that's a super interesting question. It's not one. It's one that I kind of wish I'd had a little bit more time to prepare for. So this is going to be a little bit off the
Sorry.
cuff.
No, no,
No, no,
go
it's
for it.
absolutely fine. It's a really fucking cool question. I'm going to have fun answering it, I think. The first one that springs to mind, I'm going to give you five movies. These are not necessarily in order.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're probably taken from like my top 20 of all time. But I'm just going to list five of those, and particularly ones that have been influential in the last few years. Number one, let's go with Green Room, which I don't know if
Yeah.
you guys are
Ooh.
familiar with.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart playing a Nazi. I'm never going to recover
Oh,
from that.
oh my God, dude. That's one of the scariest films I think I've ever seen. Like it's the tension just starts and never fucking stops until the credits roll.
And
It's unbelievable.
he just disappears
I
as well.
know.
Like I don't even see him as Patrick
I usually
Stewart in
feel
that
safe
role.
with
Mm.
Patrick Stewart, but
Yeah, but
not in this film.
that's not Captain Picard.
It's bizarre seeing him do that. But even once you get used to that, just the atmosphere and the vibe of that film is so like uncomfortable and unsettling. And the violence is like we kind of arguably restrained but more realistic, which makes
Yeah.
it more horrific when it does happen.
Well, it's a
I think.
believable scenario. Like I
Mm.
imagine as well as like a working musician as well. Like, what if you did sort of accidentally not do your homework and get booked to play a neo-Nazi bar?
Oh
Like
man, don't say that when I'm literally going on tour around the
yeah,
UK tomorrow.
sorry.
You're gonna like shit. All right, have we vetted these venues? Let's do the research.
Yeah,
Um,
just don't watch it before going on tour.
watching it in the van on the way.
If you don't take the
Yeah, that's definitely
opportunity
a movie
to,
that I think. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you don't take the opportunity then to do the Dead Kennedys cover and you're kind of like
Oh, that's a good
really
shout.
fly the flag. Yeah.
I reckon we've got time to learn that before we play Edinburgh on Thursday.
Yeah,
It's an easy
it's like,
song. It's Dead Kennedys. It's a piece of piss. It'll be
yeah,
fine.
it's like less than 2 minutes. Like,
Yeah. At the very least, we'll use it as our intro track.
yeah.
Um, all right, another one. This one's maybe a little bit more controversial just because of the director. Antichrist by Lars von Trier
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never
was
seen that, but
it's probably my favorite von Trier movie. I think he's a bit of a moron as a human being. I think his politics are way off, and I think he says and does things just for shock value, which is honestly kind of boring. But I do think the films that he's made are pretty singular. I don't think there's anyone else really who's made films that weird
Mm.
and sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like I guess singular. Like it's movies that could only be made by this one particular person, right? Because it's so sort of wrapped up in his personal not necessarily viewpoints, but the artistic output is so obviously him when you see it. Antichrist, I think, was explicitly for the Sky Burial video. There's a segment fairly early on in the film where one of the characters is sort of regressing through hypnosis and talking about a traumatic experience that they've had.
Mm.
And there are shots of them walking in this very sort of like ethereal manner through like fog and mist through the woods in like super slow motion and just kind of narrating over the top of it, and it's just a gorgeous piece of cinema. It's incredibly extreme in places. There are some violence in that film that I think will haunt you if you've seen the film, and if not,
I
maybe don't watch it
I've
if you're not
I've
into that
heard
kind of
about
thing.
it in school. People used to talk about it,
I've
but I've
not
never watched it.
I've not seen a single Lars von Trier film. Like I've been aware of him, but I think because of controversies and whatnot, it's kind of like not been a thing that I've like dived into. But like I'm aware
Absolutely
that it's
fair.
I'm aware that it's like a big sort of like, black hole in kind of my, sort of
That's
like
how I feel about
cinematic
Hornthrowers.
education.
Like I haven't watched Holy Mountain just because of weird shit in that.
I got into Hodorowski. I got into Hodorowski prior to a lot of that stuff coming out.
I've not seen any of his work. I've always been aware of him, but it feels like it was maybe a little too far in the art house direction for me, and I didn't necessarily think I'd get anything from it. But that was when
I
I was younger. I
I mean
definitely, as an adult, am more open to those kind of films. But
I was
now I'm like,
smoking
ugh.
I was smoking a lot of pot when I got into Hodorowski as well. So like, it's
That tracks based on the limits that I have. Um, I may not get to 5 films. I'm kind of desperately racking my brain, but I'm happy with the first two. The third one, because I feel like the first two have been a bit like film bro films.
yeah.
The third one is going to be Starship Troopers, which is absolutely not
Yes.
a film bro film, or it can be, I guess, if you're that way inclined. But I remember seeing that movie when I was way too young. I think I was about 8 years old when I saw that
Mm.
movie first, and obviously it's just ludicrous, extreme violence and lots of nudity. I don't know where my mum was when, while I was watching. I don't know what she was doing. Um, but and then I was just like, as a kid, I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then rewatching it as an adult, knowing a little bit more context, especially about the director Paul Verhoeven and like his experiences,
Yes.
and how that feeds into the art that he's made. Um, it's such an explicitly anti-fascist movie
Yeah,
that
whilst
I don't know how anyone can watch it as an adult and not get that message from it. And again, it's one of those pieces of media, a little bit like The Boys, that seems to have confused people into rooting for fascism occasionally,
yeah, I think that's
or
the
thinking
thing.
like it's pro-fascism when actually, when you break it down, it's very clearly not that at all.
No, like not at all. Like it is like it plays like, if you're like completely uneducated and you watch it, it would feel like a piece of like just a piece of badly made fascist propaganda, like in terms of like performance and things like that, like not necessarily direction, but and it's very cheesy, but then when you realize the intention of the film, it's like I hesitate to call it a masterpiece, but it really did what it set out to do.
Yeah, absolutely. If that's your target, then I guess you could call it a masterpiece. Honestly,
Mm.
I probably would. I think I'd agree with you there.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I think there's a
on the
real
top
risk if I try and get to 5 films, there's a real risk of me just sitting here for the next 20 minutes, just being like,
I
and
mean,
just trying to
like
think of something.
on the
So
topic of
we might have to call it at 3.
That's fine. On the topic of Verhoeven, I got to see an anniversary screening of RoboCop the other week, like in the
Nice.
cinema, and it's just it holds up and it's ridiculous.
Seeing that on the big screen must have been a lot of fun. I'm a bit
It
jealous.
it was the director's cut that was 20 seconds longer because the scene where Ed 20 whatever, like the big robot, it just the shot of him like gunning that guy down just goes on and
Just
constantly
goes on and
long.
on and on. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen the
like
director's cut. I love that that's the only real difference between that and the
yeah,
theatrical
it's like 20
release.
seconds
It's just
difference.
this dude just gets wrecked even harder. That's about it. Like
Yeah.
it's great.
And yeah, like it's like tying it back to politics,
I know what you're gonna say.
somebody present here at university wrote a essay about a Marxist analysis of the themes of RoboCop.
Just a Robocop in
Nice.
general. Using like Alf user and shit like that. Like,
Well, again, it's definitely got its similarities to Starship Troopers there. And Paul Verhoeven's clearly like he knows what he's doing when he's making these films. Where it on the surface level will appear to be about one thing, but it's really very clearly not about that thing, or it's criticizing that thing quite specifically.
Yeah, like you could very easily make a RoboCop film and it just be sheer propaganda.
hmm.
And
They
kind
kind
of
of did when they tried to remake it.
Yeah.
They just
yeah, I
didn't
was
get. They
thinking
just
that.
did not get what the point of that film was at all, and just made essentially a propaganda movie. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, whereas like the anti-capitalism, anti-corporatism, and like it wasn't a love letter to the police, but in any way, but it was also pointing out like, no, these are police, despite the function that they perform within society, are workers too, and kind of, the themes of them going on strike after being bought out by a corporation. And sorry,
Yeah, I think
you should be
you could
taking this
argue that film's
away.
more about like it's more about like class struggle, I think, than and like corporatism, as you say, than necessarily
Yeah.
like all cops are bastards, which obviously is objectively true. But yeah, that's clearly not the direction he wanted to take. And I think in that aspect, particularly in the time that it was made, I think making working class cops the kind of heroes of the story does make a lot more sense than maybe it would
Yeah,
in
I think
2024, for
like
example.
I think like in terms of like the ACAP thing as well, it's just kind of like a point I tend to make like is like not necessarily like that each cop individually is a bastard. It's important to just say that it's the function that they perform within society, like in when you analyze it through like a kind of like class lens, and they support the material interests of the ruling classes and like defend their property, and like which side of a picket line do you find a cop on? Like it's I think it's important like pointing out no, it's the role that you perform within society that makes you a bastard. It's not you know a value judgment on you as a human being, or I'm sure you're very nice when you're off GC or whatever, you know.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a judgment on you as a person until you make it one.
Yeah.
I'd say that's an important addendum. But yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. Absolutely agree with you on that one.
Um,
Um, not to be ungrateful, I am going to have to wrap this up fairly
That is
soon.
fine. You were gonna.
no,
Because, like I
I
say,
was very
I'm off on
conscious.
tour tomorrow morning. I've not packed. I've not really got anything
No,
together,
I
so I need to go
was
and do that.
I was starting to become very conscious of that, but kind of like got lost in just rambling about things.
Well, no, the
But
same thing happened last time. We have good chats whenever we do this, and I'm always very grateful for you guys for having me on.
no, we're happy to have you on, and it's like especially like rewarding and happy for us when we see like when we see somebody that we've like like met earlier in their sort of like career with Dawntreader, and then seeing you like really excel yourself and stuff like that. It was just exciting having you back on to talk about that.
Yeah, there's no one else I'd rather talk to about, especially because you guys have kind of been with me here the whole time, and I really fucking appreciate you. Would like to make that clear.
Oh
Oh,
no, thank
thank
you.
you.
Like, yeah, the feelings mutual, and like, just want to reiterate, just like, Bloom and Decay is, if for anyone for whatever reason hasn't checked it out that's listening to it, please just hit it up on Spotify, or better yet, Bandcamp. Purchase it on Bandcamp, and support this man because it's one of the most interesting albums to come out in the genre this year.
And also, where can we people find Viatorum on tour?
Oh yes, very sorry.
Yeah, so we're heading out tomorrow morning. The first day is in Edinburgh on Thursday night, with our
Mhm.
boys in Perpetual Paradox. We are then kind of zigzagging our way back down across the country and ending back in London on the 21st of this month. This is our first time out on tour as a band. We've kind of had varying experiences individually with other acts, but this is our first time going out together. And we're really fucking excited. So if anyone's interested and you'd like to come and say hi, check us out on socials at Viatorum UK on basically everything, I think.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, keep up with what we're doing and come hang out, come say hi, come punch each other in the face, whatever it is you guys like to do at shows.
Anyway, man, I'm gonna let you go. Wish you all the best on the tour, and I hope we get to see you in Liverpool. And yet again,
Hopefully, it'll be great to see you again. It'll be great to meet you in person, Liv, as well, and we can have a little reminisce. Yeah, that'll be lovely. Hopefully, thank you again for having me on. I really, really appreciate you guys and all the good work you do, especially like shining lights on like newer bands. I know you play various people from my sort of little RABM scene that I'm kind of a
mm,
part of. And I think there are very few outlets that do that as regularly as you guys do. So I'm not going to speak for the scene, but like on behalf of me and like some of the other people I'm on a label with from LDP, shout out Matt and Mike as well. Basically, none of this would have happened from them without them. Um, People like like Man and Widden and Michael
yeah,
Riesel and how you say that fucking word.
Michael Heisel.
Again,
yeah,
some
I
again black
have it
metal
on.
bands and
Yeah.
unpronounceable names go
yeah.
hand in hand. Yeah, just thank you for everything you do, and I'm looking forward to maybe chatting to you again soon.
No, no, but absolutely. And yeah, lastly, again, Bloom and Decay out now. Check it out if you haven't already. Thank you very much for joining us, and
No problem. Anytime. Thanks for
have a
having me.
great tour, mate.
Cheers.